All right, folks, for today's video, we're going to be looking at exchange rates. A lot of times you'll see this referred to as the Forex market, the foreign exchange market. And for this, what you really have to imagine is sort of like a bank in the middle of the ocean where all currencies of the world are going to be exchanged because you need to buy goods in whatever currency the home country has. So if something is produced in the US, you have to buy it using US dollars. If something is produced in Japan, you have to buy it with yen. So that's how you have to think of this. You have to take your US dollars and exchange it for the yen to buy something from Japan. So that's what the foreign exchange market is. And when we're looking at exchange rates, it's really about the cost of purchasing the other currency. So if you look at this chart, these are outdated numbers, but you can see the way this chart works here is so one US dollar would equal about 0.0106 yen, which would equal 1.337 euros. So the way to read that is $1 buys you 1.3 euros. Now, this has obviously changed a lot. Now, the value of the euro is higher than the dollar. So the euro currently costs $1.10. So this is somewhat flipped a bit. Um, so um, when you're looking at things, uh, if the currency got more expensive, so if it takes more of your home currency or one currency to purchase the other, that's called appreciation. So I said currently the euro is costing about $1.10. If the dollar were to appreciate, the value of the euro in relation would go down. So the dollar would appreciate if the euro suddenly costs $1.05. That's the dollar appreciating against the euro. If the dollar was to depreciate against the euro, it gets less expensive. So the dollar would buy you less euros. So if the exchange rate run for $1 for $1.10 for €1, it suddenly went to $1.50 for a euro. That's the dollar depreciating because it takes more dollars to buy a euro. And obviously, as one currency appreciates relative to the other will depreciate relative to the other. So it's always two sides of the same coin here. So when we're looking at the equilibrium exchange rate, you're using a simple supply and demand graph, and the quantity of your home currency is going to be on the x-axis. The y-axis is your exchange rate. So that's the whatever foreign currency divided by whatever your home currency is. So here we have euros to dollars. The demand, in sort of quick and easy terms, is the demand for U.S. goods and financial assets. That's what's going to affect the demand curve here. So if more people want to buy U.S. goods and financial assets, that's going to shift the demand curve. The supply in here is determined by the demand for foreign goods and assets. So if you want to buy more European-made products, the supply of dollars in this would increase because you are now supplying those dollars to purchase euros. Meanwhile, if foreign people want to buy US dollars, the demand for our dollars would increase. And once again, this is all very relative based on varying countries. As demand in one country increases, supply in the other will increase, and vice versa. So it's important to remember all relative. So here we have the demand increasing. This is appreciation because the exchange rate has now increased. So the dollar has increased in value relative to the euro here. So demand increases, that's appreciation. Here we have demand decreasing. That is depreciation. It is decreased in value relative to the euro. Supply shifts. As supply increases, you have a depreciation. The exchange rate fell. And as supply decreases, you have appreciation. The exchange rate rose. So to get a little bit more specific about demand and supply shifts, These are all the determinants of demand in the foreign exchange market. Now, all of these do relate back to those exports of either goods or financial assets. So, quite simply, if there's an increase in exports, demand for your currency increases because, once again, people in other countries need your money to purchase your goods. So, if your exports increase, demand for your currency has to increase. Future expectations, an expected rise in the exchange rate, that increases demand. And that's just sort of a planning ahead sort of thing. If you expect the exchange rate to go up, you buy now. Now, that could also be speculation because then you could sell the currency back. But in most cases, this is sort of a advanced knowledge thing. Capital flows. This is where we get into the financial assets. So as you have increased rate of return, so higher interest rates, this increases the demand for your currency. Once again, they have to purchase those financial assets using your home currency. So if your real interest rate rises, your quote unquote exports of your financial assets rises, therefore increasing demand for your currency. The tricky one comes in with inflation. So when you have higher inflation, this decreases demand. And that's because your goods are now relatively more expensive. So your exports will decrease. So generally speaking, if your inflation rate rises faster than another country's, your goods are now more relatively expensive. So your exports decrease, decreasing demand for your currency. So that's depreciation. And it is important to remember all of these have depreciation and appreciation associated. So increase in demand is appreciation, decrease in demand is depreciation. When we're talking business opportunities, political stability, better business opportunities and political stability, since they increase capital inflows will increase demand as well and therefore appreciate your currency. Supply shifts. Here, once again, we're thinking of your home people in your nations, your economies demand for foreign goods and assets. That's going to be the majority of this. So if you have an increase in imports, that means you have to exchange your currency for another currency. So the supply of your currency increases, therefore depreciating your currency. If you have future expectations, an expected fall in your exchange rate, you're going to increase the supply of your currency. Once again, just trying to plan ahead for the future. Capital flows. If you have a decreased rate of return in your country versus another, based on those lower real interest rates in the loanable funds market, you're going to increase the supply of your loanable funds as you're going to exchange your currency for a foreign currency. Inflation, lower inflation is going to decrease your supply of your currency because your home goods are relatively cheaper, therefore decreasing imports. Tariffs, increasing tariffs. Now this one is different from demand. We didn't mention tariffs before, but here if you think along the same lines as the inflation issue, if you increase tariffs, so a tax on foreign made goods, that means those foreign goods are relatively more expensive. That means that your imports will decrease, therefore decreasing the supply of your currency. And of course, business opportunities, political stability. If you have a worse political and business opportunity economy, you're going to increase capital outflow, therefore increasing the supply of your currency. Now you might say a lot of these are basically two sides of the same coin when we looked at demand versus supply. Yes. What you really have to think about is what is the question asking about specifically, and what is your home country, because it's always going to be one of these sides. Either you'll deal with supply or demand, depending on what home country you're looking at. So make sure you keep that in mind. Now, monetary and fiscal policy do affect this market as well. So if you have an increase in your money supply, this depreciates your currency because you have a domestic increase in your price level and your real GDP. So you increase your price level, you increase your real GDP. This increases your supply in your exchange market because people have more money, they're going to spend it. That's the real GDP side. On the price level side, you could see it almost as your increase in price level means that you will have a lower demand for your goods if it's talking about exports. Either way, you're talking depreciation, just different ways of arguing it. Normally, you see it argued in terms of the real GDP increases. Therefore, people have more money, that increases the supply. And this only makes sense because an increase in your money supply means there's literally more money out there. Some of that is going to go into the foreign exchange market. And if you're looking at it in the loanable funds way, an increase in the supply of loanable funds decreases your real interest rates. That leads to outflows. And once again, that increases the supply in the exchange market and therefore depreciation. So all of these things that work together. Generally speaking, you don't see the need for explanation too much in this era of for FRQs, but sometimes it does show up. So it is important to remember why the depreciation occurs when you have a change in your money supply. Now, of course, the decrease in the money supply will have the opposite effect. It will appreciate the currency for the exact opposite reasons as are given here. Fiscal policy. If you have expansionary fiscal policy, just like if you have expansionary monetary policy, you will have a depreciation of your currency. That's because, once again, you have a rise in your price level. If you look at that versus your exports, you will have, once again, a decrease in your exports, decreasing demand for your currency. But you could also have an increase in your income. So you'll have an increased real GDP. And once again, people have more money. Some of that's going to be going into the foreign exchange market, increasing the supply of your currency, therefore depreciating the currency, and therefore increasing. It could, if depending on how the question's asked, it could mean that increases your exports. So for this one, it's really going to focus. They don't hit this one too much because you could have either decreased exports or increased exports as a result. It's sort of a chicken or the egg thing here. And generally speaking, they try not to get there. Either the decreased exports causes the depreciation, or the depreciation then causes increased exports. It's one of those things that doesn't show up too much because of that very much hair-splitting part of this. And to complicate things even further, there could have the crowding out effect. If you have expansionary fiscal policy and the crowding out effect is taking place, that increase in deficit spending increases the real interest rate. That increase in the real interest rate means that you would have capital inflow. If you have capital inflow, that leads to an increase in demand for your currency, which means you appreciate the currency. All of this further blunts the effects of fiscal policy because that appreciation due to crowding out would decrease your exports. And if you decrease your exports, that's going to be something that pushes your aggregate demand even further left. So look out for crowding out. Once again, something that doesn't show up too much because there's a lot of hair splitting here, but it does show up from time to time. Now, when you are looking at inflation and thinking about this, it usually is in terms of imported goods versus exported goods. So the price of the imported goods depends on the exchange rate and price level in those nations. And a lot of times we'll get it down to real exchange rates in which we sort of remove the international differences of price level to see really whose good is better and who wants it more. Because certainly some countries have better ways of making various goods. You're not going to find many Europeans who say America has really good chocolate. You're going to find that they really like European chocolate much, much better. So that would be a good example. So even though we might export a crazy amount of chocolate, if you adjust really for the real exchange rates, you'll find that it's not going to be the case. Something else that factors into this is the purchasing power parity, or PPP. This is the nominal exchange rate at which a given market basket would cost the same amount in every country. And so this lets you know, is the currency currently undervalued or overvalued, depending on what that purchasing power parity is. Now, this is not perfect because it really excludes a lot of things like transport costs, taxes, differences in government comparative advantage, and all of that stuff. So it is not always the most useful thing in real terms, but it can give you an idea if the currency is undervalued or overvalued if you have a very, very easy to track item. So one example of this is that The Economist uses is the Big Mac, because typically transport costs and government differences and things like that don't really factor into what goes into making a Big Mac. So they use that to determine is the currency undervalued or overvalued based on just the Big Mac. But once again, still not perfect. So when it comes to your average question on this, it usually features some level of imports and exports. So I'm going to play this video from Refenomics, and it really does a good job of walking you through what happens when imports and exports occur between countries and what happens to the exchange rate. So I'm going to narrate this as it goes. So every millisecond of the day, money flows all over the world. Obviously, you see these green lines representing that. So why is it that different countries' currencies have different exchange rates? In this, you'll learn why this happens. So basically, we're going to simplify it, and we're going to pretend there's an exchange bank in the middle of the world that has all of the currencies of the world. See it right there. There go all of the currencies into that bank. Now, the Germans, represented by this gentleman, really like California wine for some reason. So if the Germans, right there, really enjoy that California wine, right there, how do they pay for it? They need to exchange their euros for US dollars. So how do they do this? Using the currency exchange market, which is in that bank. The Germans take their euros, put them into the bank, supply them into that bank, if you will, and demand US dollars. So if we look now at the supply and demand graph for euros, here's what happens. The Germans exchange their euros, therefore increasing the supply of euros. And this causes the price of euros to fall. So this means that the euro has depreciated relative to the dollar. So they increase the supply of euros to buy what? US dollars. So if the Germans supplied their euros to demand US dollars to buy that wine, then demand for US dollars has increased. As the demand for US dollars increased, this means the price of the dollar rises. That means it's appreciated relative to the euro. Now those Germans can enjoy their wine after exchanging the euros for dollars. And that's it. So in most cases, when you see questions on the AP test about this stuff, normally it's that level. Normally it's about those imports and exports and either increasing the supply or increasing the demand, depending on what side of the equation you're on.